Thank you, Chair Esquivel and board members. Barry Nelson with Golden State Salmon Association. I'm going to talk just about Alternative 6A and protections for existing flows. As Chris Schutz pointed out, the VA flows are intended to be on top of reference flows. VAs refer to baseline as reference flows, and that those are determined annually. There's nothing in the voluntary agreements that lock those baseline flows in for the life of the voluntary agreements. Um, and I would just remind folks that the VAs are very much like that salad, with the VA flows floating on top of existing flows, temperature requirements, CVP deliveries, D1641 biological opinions, and so forth. All of the, if anything changes in those conditions, that jello mold salad collapses. My aunt's upset, and adult ecosystem doesn't need what it needs to survive. As I said, nothing locks in those baseline flows for the length of the voluntary agreements. They could change significantly. The most obvious reason they could change significantly are the water projects that Chris Schutz mentioned. There are actually many other ways in which those baseline flows could change, and those changes could undercut, could eliminate, or or result in conditions even worse than current conditions. So what's the purpose of protecting those ecosystem flows? It is to be clear about what flows the Bay Delta Plan would protect from future diversion. Essential both for the large projects that DWR referred to, as well as small projects. It's also essential for understanding how the board is going to control the operations of existing. This slide I showed you at our last at your last workshop. This is how unimpaired flows would be protected by the unimpaired flow approach. That orange line, the black line is existing flows. The orange line is a percent of unimpaired flows, and what would be protected is everything under that orange line. The new unimpaired flows required, the already protected ESA, CISA, D1641 flows, but also those unprotected environmental flows above the current regulatory requirements. Everything in green there, in solid green, are unprotected existing flows that an unimpaired flow approach protects. Water, as DWR said this morning, there are times when water would be in excess of those unimpaired flow conditions, and as Chris said, and that's shown in red here. The VA approach is a very different approach. It would not allow the diversion of that tiny slice of additional VA water, would not allow the diversion of water protected under ESA, CISA, and D1641, but everything above the regulatory minimum, which, as DWR pointed out in their slide this morning, is an enormous amount of water much of the time. That water would be unprotected by the state board from rediversion. Just to compare those two again, next slide, please. That's the unimpaired flow approach again. The difference between the two is quite dramatic. So alternative 6A would allow projects to divert January to June flows when delta conditions are above 42,800. That offers protection for a broad range of values: salmon outmigration, harmful algae blooms, ecosystem health, listed species. As to whether 42,800 is high enough, I don't know enough about white sturgeon. My colleague and friend John Rosenfield does. The presentation he gave to you at our last meeting, at your last workshop, shows that the white sturgeon receives benefits even at flows above 42,800. So is that protective enough? I would let John Rosenfield and other biologists comment on that. But it's certainly, as Chris Schutz mentioned, appropriate to set a high bar for new projects, given that we're in such a deep hole, to use Alternative 6A would apply non-VA water user unimpaired flow, temperature, and delta requirements to new projects. My main observation here is that it's strange that this proposal would apply the unimpaired flow approach to new projects offered by voluntary agreement signatories, but not to existing projects offered. So this would actually set a And I don't understand the rationale for that. The board should adopt a cautious approach to evaluating new projects, but I simply don't understand the rationale for having two different standards to apply to projects controlled by the VA agencies. I'll spend most of my time talking about DWR's new alternative. It's not entirely clear to me if that alternative is submitted on behalf of all the VA parties, but I'll refer to it as the DWR alternative. As you heard, it focuses on the development of a long fin life cycle model. It would give the VA science program control over developing a proposal for existing flows. The time, the period it would address is a little bit unclear. The conceptual proposal you received talks about March through May, not January through June, so it's not entirely clear if that proposal would cover the entire January through June period. It's important to note that the longfin model development is already an ITP requirement. There's nothing new DWR is proposing to the state board. And that longfin-based approach leaves a lot of things out. As I said, it's not clear if it would address the entire January through June period, doesn't address the need of rivers upstream of the Delta, doesn't address fall run salmon or their outmigration needs or through the Delta, doesn't address other listed species, ecosystem health, or harmful algae blooms. We know a lot about all of those issues, as your scientific basis report points out. The longfin smelt model doesn't change our status quo knowledge on any of these issues. No, the board knows plenty to adopt existing protections for existing flows using robust science we already have. I won't run over this timeline again. It's development of a model and reports back to you. And note the quote here at the end that DWR highlighted again. The proposal is to develop and establish a flow threshold protection criteria by the conclusion of the 8-year term period. This is not a proposal to protect existing flows. This is a proposal for the Water Board to not protect existing flows for 8 years. It's also important to note that the VA proposal would allow for the VA program to be extended by another 7 years. So this is a proposal to delay until after the VA program, the term of the VA program. It's not clear to me whether that is a proposal to delay for 8 years or a proposal to delay existing flows for 15 years. But as Chris pointed out, it is clear that the Water Board is being asked already and will be asked to issue water rights permits for many projects during this period without having any protections for existing flows under the DWR proposal. Says and given delays in updating the Bay Delta plan and in the VAs, those additional delays, a delay from 8 to 15 years is quite likely. This approach falsely suggests that the board does not have adequate information. Your scientific basis report has plenty of information. This approach also increases water user control over developing ecosystem protections. It quite clearly appears to be designed to facilitate a water grab by proposed new storage and conveyance projects and possibly by ongoing operations. It would likely more than eliminate any benefits from the new AVA flows and result in conditions worse than the disastrous conditions we see. This isn't a proposal to protect existing flows. What you've heard today is a shell game. It's a shell game because you asked DWR for a proposal to protect existing flows. It's what DWR said they was going to present to the state board. And instead, they have given you a proposal to delay action for 8 to 15 years. It's also a shell game because the analysis of the VAs assumes that those existing flows will remain intact. But the VAs themselves do not leave those existing flows intact. They set the stage for the diversion of potentially enormous amounts of those existing flows. It's also a shell game because you were just told today you have plenty of time to adopt protections for existing flows because new projects won't be operational for years. But the Water Board will permit some of those projects during the life of this Bay Delta Plan update. I have to say that for an industry which is 100% shut down, it's illegal to catch salmon in the state of California last year and the year before that. We don't know about the coming year. This doesn't look like a serious offer. This doesn't look like a good faith offer. So what should the state board do? Adopt clear science-based rules about what flows are protected and what flows are not protected. Those yardsticks should govern both the operation of current water projects and govern the evaluation of future proposals for future diversions and storage, and a cautious, protective approach to evaluating new projects is enormously appropriate given the overallocated state of the system, as Chris mentioned, and the status of the ecosystem as well. And option one is clearly, from our perspective, that approach should apply to all water users, and the water board should reject the VA approach.